Hello, everyone. Welcome to our weekly chat. Thanks for joining me again. It's great to take a break from my writing and research to chat with you about some topics. And when I first started doing these videos, I thought maybe I wouldn't have anything to talk about after a while, but the topics just keep coming, and that's great. Questions that I don't always get to answer in more formal setting. This is a great way to do it, and it gives me a chance to think about some things, and through the questions that are asked. This week's topic comes from a courtesy of the children who are the day campers at the Town of Aurora Recreation Department's summer day camp at Hamlin Park. I get the opportunity for the past few years. I've been invited to come do little history tours for the young campers. And today we did East Aurora Trivia, which was a lot of fun. And I was shocked. The kids got a little, uh, we won't say out of control, but they were overly excited about trying to answer the questions and come up with, they were multiple choice questions, a lot of them, and trying to figure out what questions answers made sense and what ones didn't make sense, so they could eliminate those as possible answers. It was great to see them just trying to analyze history, which was a lot of fun. But one of the questions that comes up, and a lot of the topic that comes up, of course, while we're sitting in Hamlin Park for the Hamlin Park day camp, is the history of the park. And we talk a little bit about how it became a park, and we often take for granted our gem, which it is a gem in the middle of our village. Not many villages have a park that's the size of our park and has as many things in it that we do here in East Aurora. So we talked about the history of the park and why it's called Hamlin Park. And so I thought that would be a great topic to talk about today, because there's been a lot of misconceptions and misinformation a little bit about Hamlin Park over the years. And it has a fascinating story. And actually, the park, people often ask me, how old is Hamlin Park? It's actually as old as, you could probably argue that the park is as old as the first settlement here, pioneer settlement, here in East Aurora. That plot of land was left aside as we were developing, as the village was developing and houses were being built. There was a grove of mostly maple trees, and there were some later on orchards were put in that area. But there were maple trees in the middle of the village, and you'll look at old pictures, probably the earliest pictures we have of the village, late 1800s, where you can see in the background the grove of trees that was left behind. And it was owned by the Holmes family, one of them being Mary Holmes, and ended up on the maps. But she owned a grove area that extended beyond what is Hamlin Park today, further up toward Main Street. And over the years, late 1800s, early 1800s even, it was privately owned land, and they would allow people from the village to and the community to use it for picnics and events. So there were 4th of July picnics there. There's stories in the newspapers about people picnicking on the field of violets under the trees, and under in the shade of the trees. So there'd be church picnics there, church events, and it was just sort of an informal arrangement where the Holmes family and the private owners of this property allowed the community to use it. And in fact, in 1850 and 1854, the Erie County Fair was held at Holmes Grove. So events like that, even bigger events, not as big as the Erie County Fair is today, of course, but bigger, more formal events were held in Holmes Grove. And we'll talk a little bit about the Erie County Fair's connection to East Aurora in a couple weeks. That'll be our topic. So it was just this informal arrangement. Well, what happened is the Holmes family sold it to, it went out of their hands, and they actually sold it to a local landowner who, that's when people started to be concerned that we would lose this very precious property to a private landowner, and that the private landowner would no longer allow the community to use it. And actually in 1887, this local man had purchased the Grove and 19 acres that surrounded it. He actually owned what was the field on Walnut, now being developed, but he owned a lot of land around what is today Hamlin Park. Well, the village had approached him, the government had approached him and said, you know, that they're concerned that this property that the community has used for so long would be no longer usable by the community. And he actually came with a proposal that he would give the land to the village, um, a small part of the overall property that he had owned, so that they could keep it as a park. The only thing is he didn't want. He had said that he would not have to pay taxes, that he would be exempt from property taxes for not only the rest of his life, but also for his family for the next 50 years. So whether he lasted another 50 years, his family would not have to pay property taxes on all the land that he still owned. And the village, unfortunately, he was such a big landowner that the village didn't feel that that was a good deal. And so they rejected the offer. So he continued to own the land. In 1890, a company called the East Aurora Land and Improvement Company, you you'll see that name on maps. A lot of your searches and titles, if you live in the southern side of the village, Linden Avenue, Sycamore Street, you'll see that name because your house most likely was built by this land and improvement company. It was a company owned by local investors who sold off lots and built houses around what is Hamlin Park today. They actually bought the park as part of the deal, what is today the park. And the park was actually part of their advertising and to entice people to build a house. As they do today, developers will say, there's a park nearby, the amenities, shopping nearby, and they used what is today Hamlin Park, the Grove, as a way to entice people to build a house, buy land and build a house in this neighborhood, on the southern end of the village of East Aurora. They actually had a proposal at one point to give the land to the village, and that fell apart as well. There was some caveats to that, and that residential development company had put too many caveats on the transfer of that parkland to the village, so it just fell apart. I have to do a little more research about that because I'm not quite sure why it fell apart, but around 1890 they tried to transfer it for public use, and that fell apart. One of the plans, and we have a map that shows it, was the reason we have a Park Place as a street name and a South Park Place. And the kids at the park during the summer camp, we talked about this. It's intriguing. If you look at a map of East Aurora or even a Google Earth view from above, you'll see that South Park Place on the southern end of Hamlin Park and Park Place, they line up perfectly. Well, an original plan was to put the residential development company was going to put the road right through what is Hamlin Park today and build houses on there. They actually even had lot numbers assigned and section numbers assigned for this project. So that could have happened. It could have been houses. So first time I believe that I would give credit to someone saving Hamlin Park would be when this East Aurora Land and Improvement Company came along. Yes, there was a plan for housing development on it, but they actually saved the land. They could have easily built houses immediately on it, but they saved it. Yes, it was for capital purposes. It was for their investment purposes. To have a park in the neighborhood of a new housing development certainly made it more attractive for people to build a house on what is Linden and Sycamore and other streets around the park, but they did save it. One of the things that came out of that was the baseball diamond that is in Hamlin Park today. It was actually called the Syndicate Field, and actually a nickname for the development company was called the Syndicate, because it was a syndicate of local people, a group of local investors. And they called it the Syndicate Field, so the baseball diamond. And baseball games started, I tracked down as far as I could, and I believe the first baseball game was played there in 1893. So you had the Grove on one side, which is the northern part of Hamlin Park up by Prospect with all the trees. And then you had the recreational area. And those were two separate lots. And the recreational area is where they played the baseball and other sports. And then the Grove was the picnic grove, they called it, was a separate spot. And we have to remember this: at this time there was no playground, there was no Roycroft Pavilion. It was just an open picnic grove area. So, um, so this arrangement seemed to work. Private land, but people could still use it. They played baseball there. See stories in the newspaper of people picnicking and then watching a baseball game or having a pickup baseball game on the baseball diamonds next to it. So uh, it seemed to work out for a few years. Well, then the late 1890s come along. So for about a decade, this arrangement was happening. Um, late 1800s, 1890s, people were starting to get concerned again that the Hamlin Park was going to be lost. Again, there was pressure for housing. The East Aurora Land and Improvement Company was selling lots around what is today Hamlin Park, and there was a talk that the Land and Improvement Company, having failed to get the property transferred for public use, was going to sell it. And sell it not only maybe in one big piece, but maybe divided up into lots, as the maps had shown, and building houses. The pressure to build houses on that open land must have been immense. So the village came up with a plan to buy the park, buy the Grove, and buy the recreational area, the baseball diamonds. So, and it was going to cost money to do so. It was going to cost money, number one, to purchase it, and number two, to make improvements to it for a public park. So in 1899, they brought forth a public referendum to vote to borrow money in order to purchase was known as Holmes Grove, after the people who originally owned it, and the baseball diamond recreational facilities. Um, I did a ton of research on this, and I'm writing, actually including it as part of a book project I'm working on for the future. So I won't get into the nitty gritty details, but essentially, what is now Hamlin Park is actually three separate lots, and we're talking about the first two, the Grove and the baseball diamond, and they put it for a public vote on whether we should buy just the Grove, just the baseball diamond, or combine the two together and buy them both. There were actually people in the community felt we maybe didn't need the baseball diamond, but the Grove would be nice to save, and vice versa. So, long story short, the villagers vote uh, to um, to purchase by an overwhelming margin, by the way, to purchase both. I believe it was. Let me just make sure I get it. 115 uh, and 25 against, and 13 ballots were blank. But so they voted yes, was what the Easter Advertiser said. They were very excited about it because the Easter Advertiser actually was in full support of this project and was very excited about it. So the village officials immediately after this vote happened to buy both. So then that was proposition one. So with the acceptance of that, the other two propositions to buy just the baseball diamond and just the Grove became moot. They put in place a plan to borrow $7,000, which would be over $200,000 today, a lot more money than that, and probably even more with what we have to deal with today, to make this a park. And they were actually deciding at the time what to name the park. And one of the names that they thought of was to take after New York City and name it Central Park because of its central location in the village. And also, it also looks similar where you have development all the way around it, but you've saved this area in the middle of the village, this green space, this active space. So they were going to name it Central Park. So we were borrowing the money, taxes would go up in order to pay for that, and we would name it Central Park. Well, before the purchase could happen, someone came and snatched it up, and they bought it from underneath the village. And someone got wind of it, actually. There was a little note in the paper about it. Well, it turns out it was Cicero Hamlin, who had owned the Hamlin farm where Hamlin Avenue and North Willow Street are today. World famous farm. He had lived here for a short period of time, but spent most of his time in Buffalo, but still owned this village farm. Champion horses, super famous. It's hard to put into context how famous he was. He was actually, one estimate, the richest man out in New York State outside of New York City, uh, and had made his success on much of his success was based off of East Aurora, and he had his village farm, and so he had purchased what is today Hamlin Park, at least the Grove part and the baseball diamond. Went to the village and said, in appreciation for everything that the village of East Aurora had done for his business, for his farm, he purchased the park, the Grove, and the baseball diamond. And he only put two conditions on it: that it shall forever be a park. So we talked about this with the kids in the park during the summer day camp, was that thanks to Cicero Hamlin, no one can ever uh, take that park away, build houses, build a store, do anything else, because he had said that if the park is forever used, or shall forever be used as a park, open to all, which is another key element of it. It's not to be, you can't charge people to get in. It's a public park. This has come up a couple times with events at the park, that it shall be open to everybody, um, and a public park in perpetuity. So no, forever and ever. They can never take it away as a park. Otherwise, the land goes to his heirs, and it's serious. So we have the paperwork that shows this. The second thing is that the village needs to spend $100 each year on upkeep of the park, and of course that happens just every year. Um, Sort of naturally. We spend a lot more than $100. But over the decades, the next few decades, they put in a lot of money into the park, and we still maintain it today. But he saw a vision of the recreation area being used as recreation. So the baseball diamonds, sports, and those sorts of things. And then the Grove being a sort of the more passive area, where people could picnic, and concerts in the park, things like that. So he had this vision, and a lot of times when we talk about Hamlin Park, we think about, well, what was Mr. Hamlin's vision for the park? And it may not match always what people see of it today, but he envisioned, according to his own writings and his own statements, a park where everybody could use it, and that it was open to all. And I think he envisioned us having baseball games and concerts and events here in the park, open to everybody. Now, the Griggs side, beyond what are now the pickleball courts, used to be the tennis courts, that was added on later. So the school district actually, the high school was up on Main Street, and the school district bought the end down by Griggs Place for football games and a sports for sports. That wasn't part of Hamlin Park. You'd actually go into Hamlin Park to get to it. But that's the school district bought that. Well, when the high school was built, they changed up on Center Street, and they moved the high school from Main Street to up to Center Street. They had more room for a football field and sports facilities. So then they sold the property along Griggs Place, to the village, and it became part of Hamlin Park. But that end at Griggs Place was not part of the original park. So that's why I said there were three separate sections. You have the Grove, the baseball diamond, which was considered separate. Those were two separate parcels when we first purchased it. And then later on, 1970-ish, late 60s and 70s, the Griggs Place end became part of Hamlin Park. So the evolution of the park is quite interesting in how the park developed over time. Now, the park has become a meeting place. There's no doubt about it. I feel has met the goal that Mr. Hamlin set for it. We've had 4th of July's there before Hamlin Park became Hamlin Park. And of course, the village named the park. They had originally thought, well, we'll name it Central Park. But of course, after Mr. Hamlin donated the land and saved the village taxpayers all that money, we still had to pay for upkeep and the big projects. They actually put a iron fence around the whole park in order to keep animals out, livestock that were getting in there back in the original days. Uh, but we didn't have to pay that expense, and thanks to Mr. Hamlin, we named the park Hamlin Park. This has caused confusion because we've seen over the years some people think that Hamlin Park was where his racetrack was and where his horse farm was, and it wasn't. And I always say that the only connection that Hamlin Park has to Cicero Hamlin is he owned it for 10 minutes, and that might be an exaggeration, but he literally owned it for just such a short period of time in order to transfer it to the village. His farm was up on where Hamlin Avenue and North Willow Street are, and Hamlin Park was a totally separate parcel of land that he gave in appreciation for all the village did for him. So he had no connection to Hamlin Park before he bought it for the village for a very short period of time. And I say 10 minutes as sort of an exaggeration, as a joke, but it quite honestly was just probably a few days that he actually owned Hamlin Park. And that's his only connection. And of course, his name is put on it because he gave it as a gift. But he didn't live there. He didn't have any business there. He didn't have his farm there. And some people, actually, I saw at one point someone had placed the racetrack that he had in where Hamlin Park is today, and that is not true. That was up on Main Street. So that's the history of the park, and it has been saved several times, and I find it amazing that it is actually still here. And of course, hopefully, if we and I see no indication not, that if we keep to the commitment we made to Mr. Hamlin, that it will be a park forever. But I'm just amazed that there are several times, several opportunities for it to be developed, for it to fall apart as a park, and each time it was saved by people who were thinking ahead, and Mr. Hamlin especially, who thought well into the future. And I tell the kids at the park, the children at the park during the summer camp, that we're in the park because of him, and thanks to him, able to use it, not only the land, but the restrictions he put on it in order to ensure that it will always be used for the park. So when you see the kids playing in the park, or a baseball game, or enjoying Hamlin Park on the 3rd of July, we have Mr. Hamlin to thank for putting that restriction on it, and making sure that it will always be a park. Okay, thanks for joining me today. And if you have any questions, comments, subject ideas, I'd be glad to hear them. I, of course, love talking about history. So either drop them in the comments or send me a private message. Again, we'll see you next time. And until next week, enjoy the sunshine, the summer, and let me know if you have any questions come to mind about local history. We'll talk next time. See you then.